because we had to make a certain deadline to be able to get it done. And I think it could have borne a little more debate. And I'm not sure if I would have voted to put it on the ballot if it wasn't in that rushed format, if it wasn't a special election, if it didn't seem pretty hypocritical based on what we'd done just a few months ago by eliminating August special elections.
Hi again, everyone. It is 5 o'clock in New York. I'm Alicia Menendez in for Nicole Wallace. You know, it is not often you hear an elected representative call out the hypocrisy of his or her own political party. But that is how bad things are right now in Ohio. That was Republican State Representative Jamie Callender speaking with our colleague Ali Vitale about Issue 1, the measure on Ohio ballots today that will ultimately have huge implications for reproductive freedoms in the Buckeye State. Let's rewind just a little to January, when Ohio Republicans voted to get rid of special elections in August, saying they had low turnout and were expensive. But then, just months later, when they saw a ballot initiative gaining traction that would enshrine abortion rights into the state constitution, Republicans in the state reversed course and scheduled this special election that is taking place as we speak. So now, in this hastily planned August election, Republicans are trying to doom the reproductive rights bill before it even gets on the ballot by enacting Issue 1, which would raise the threshold of support required to pass state constitutional amendments to 60%. Instead of a simple majority. It's a measure Republicans have openly admitted is about stopping the upcoming abortion rights amendment. And a perfect example of, if you can't win the game, just change the rules. And if you need more proof about why they want to raise the threshold to 60%, just take a look at recent polling, which shows support for adding an abortion rights amendment to the state constitution is at, 58%. November's proposed amendment would counter Ohio's heartbeat bill, which bans abortions after 6 weeks of pregnancy, before most women even know that they're pregnant. Currently, it remains temporarily blocked by a state judge. Ohio Republicans are scared for November because in the year since Roe was overturned, the direct ballot initiatives in 6 states, including conservative ones like Kentucky, like Kansas, voters chose every time to protect women's reproductive rights. NBC News reports, quote, raising the threshold for passage of any future constitutional amendments would mark a major shift in Ohio, where only a simple majority has been required since 1912. Several former Republican office holders, including 4 GOP ex-governors, have publicly opposed the measure. Polls in Ohio close at 7:30 p.m. Eastern tonight. And that is where we start this hour. President of NARAL Pro-Choice America, Minnie Tamaraju, is here. Plus, Danielle Hawley, she is a law scholar on diversity and higher education and the incoming president at Mount Holyoke College and professor of politics and journalism at Morgan State University, as well as an MSNBC contributor. Dr. Jason Johnson is here. Minnie, give us your reaction to what is happening today in Ohio, how Republicans are resorting to changing the legislative rules because they know how much support this proposed amendment already had heading into November.
They're trying to change the rules and they're still going to lose. That's what's remarkable about what we're seeing in Ohio. The early vote that we're seeing right now is historic. It's record early vote numbers for an August election, much like we saw in Kansas last year. So it just seems extremist Republicans are not learning their lessons about how Americans, and specifically in Ohio, how folks feel about abortion, but also so fundamentally intertwined their democratic freedoms, their fundamental freedoms, like their ability to vote and keep that 50% threshold. I also just want to note Ohioans are wising up to the fact that Secretary of State LaRose and his cronies have received 82% of their funding for this effort has come from one Illinois billionaire who has January 6th ties. So you just have to remember how fundamentally intertwined these rights are, these freedoms are, and how smart voters are getting about it.
Danielle, many referenced enthusiasm. Ohio seeing very high turnout numbers for the special election. Fox 8 in Cleveland reporting nearly 700,000 Ohioans cast their vote early in person or via absentee ballot. So compared to last August, that is nearly 7 times higher, more than 3 times higher compared to the May 2022 primary. Here's the thing, Danielle, it is about what is happening in Ohio, but it is more generally about what this issue or these issues, both the attacks on reproductive freedoms and the attacks on democracy, mean to voters who are wondering about the future of this country?
Absolutely. I think when the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade in the Dobbs decision, they said this should be left to democracy. It should be left to the states. And what we see is these anti-democratic efforts popping up in an effort to silence the populace about what they feel is right in terms of reproductive health. As you talked about in the 6 other ballot initiatives on this issue, even in conservative states, they have affirmed that women should have a right to choose in terms of their reproductive health. And so instead of playing by those rules, what we're seeing and what the Supreme Court predicted was absolutely wrong in the sense that when it goes to the states, instead of playing by the rules, it's state legislatures, many of whom are incredibly gerrymandered, that want to prevent the people from voting, because when the people vote, we see that they want to protect women's reproductive health.
Right. I mean, Dr. Jason Johnson, this is what we're seeing all across this country. This isn't just about Ohio, right? This idea of Republicans saying, well, if we can't win the right way, then how about we just change the rules? That wasn't just Donald Trump. It wasn't just his cronies. It is the modern practice of this party.
Right. Well, we've seen this in the North Carolina legislature. We saw this in the Wisconsin legislature. Whenever you have a state that's like eking towards blueness or purple or something else like that, you see a gerrymandered Republican legislature try and block people's access to vote, change what the voting rules are, change the voting times. And sometimes it works. But occasionally, if you get a universal issue like abortion, people get angry and then they're going to turn out the vote. And Republicans show again, because they're not a party, they're a dime store front for a terrorist organization at this point called MAGA. You basically see that the Republicans over and over and over again snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. They could have just been happy with the Dobbs decision by a corrupt and highly influenced and basically completely dismissive Supreme Court at this point. But no, they had to go further. And now they've angered a bunch of people. And look, I used to teach in Ohio. I've been in contact with a lot of my former students there, and people who generally don't care about voting and certainly don't care in August are all turning out to vote. Why? Because nobody likes it when their rights are being snatched away. And one other important thing to mention, Alicia, because I think people need to understand this. It's not just that the rule is saying, hey, should it be harder to add a constitutional amendment? There are other elements to this issue one. It was going to eliminate what they call a curing period, where basically if you did have enough petitions out to put something on the ballot, you got an extra 10 days to replace names that may have been dismissed. They were going to get rid of that, too. They were basically going to make it impossible to have citizen initiatives to change the Constitution. That is why this is blowing up in the GOP's face. I wish more people would turn out in general elections and get rid of the legislatures that do this. But this is another example of an organization that's no longer a party and operates more like a cult and a religious cult than an actual representation of policy preferences of the people.
You know, I want to underscore something that Jason said there, which is we've heard a lot about this 60% threshold. But there are other elements to this that are particularly nefarious. So it does increase the voting threshold for constitutional amendments. It also makes new requirements for ballot initiatives to qualify. It would require signatures from each of the state's 88 counties, up from 44, where it stands now. So it is doubling that. I guess the thing for me is, if it all sounds tedious, right? If it all sounds bureaucratic, if we're trying our best to explain it in a way that is not, that is by design, right? Their hope was that if it seemed like they were just tinkering on the margins with the process, that people would not be able to connect the dots and understand that what they were actually doing was trying to take away basic rights.
Yeah, I think that activism is what we're seeing as a response to these attempts to change the rules. And I think that's what's really been surprising, I think, for the Republican Party, is these are things that people care about and believe are a part of our core individual rights in this country. And that means that we are willing as voters to go to the lengths that we need to, including meeting some of these very extreme measures. So this would be terrible if it passes. It looks like it won't. But the idea, for example, that you are raising to a very high percentage, I think it's 5% of voters that you need to get to even get a ballot initiative onto the ballot for a constitutional amendment, those kinds of changes in the rule really do impact the voice of the people and the basic bedrock principles of democracy. And we have to be extremely concerned about attempts to change the rules in the way that the Ohio legislature is attempting to change them, that the Republicans in the Ohio legislature are attempting to change them.
So, Minnie, let's come back to what is driving all of this. What is driving all of this has to do with abortion rights in the state of Ohio. And I want to read to you from an op-ed in the New York Times. It calls what Republicans are doing in Ohio one of their most brazen schemes. Quote, the episode should serve as a reminder that despite the Supreme Court's claim that Dobbs merely returned the question of abortion to the states, for opponents of abortion, allowing the residents of each state to decide this issue for themselves was never the goal, at least not in the long term. Instead, the long-term goal is to prohibit abortion as widely and as completely as possible. That's the reason some states have refused to include exceptions for rape or incest in their post-Dobbs abortion laws, despite broad popular support for such exceptions. That's why some states are seeking to penalize aiding travel to other states to obtain abortions and to end access to medication abortion throughout the country. I mean, it is laid bare here, Minnie, right? They said, don't worry about it. If you live in a state where voters want this, you don't have to worry twice about it. You do. You do, both because they don't actually want the right to be accessible, and because even if you live in a very, very blue state where this is not an issue, you are still having women from all those other states travel into your state in order to access care, and that impacts the quality of care that you are able to get in your bright blue state, Minnie. So talk to me about the stakes of what we are seeing in Ohio, both for the women of Ohio, but also all across this country.
So when you put up the polling for the November ballot initiative on the ballot referendum on reproductive freedom, I wanted to note that in addition to 58% of Ohioans supporting reproductive freedom, that includes a third of the GOP and 85% of independent women in the state. That is really remarkable. And there was national polling that came out today that showed a clear majority of Americans support abortion access without restrictions and exemptions. That's a brand new historic high. So look, I mean, we're in a moment right now historically in this country where we know extremists have gone too far. It's been significant overreach. We're hearing horror stories from states with bans. Folks in blue states, like in California, passed their own ballot initiative in the midterms to protect and encode abortion access in their constitution for precisely this reason. And that's why you're seeing more and more states move in this direction. So look, when they sent it to the states, they didn't bargain on the fact that the states were going to fight back and that voters were going to recognize, particularly Republicans and independents, how tragic and horrifying the situation is. So it is exciting in some ways to see folks wake up to the abortion crisis in this country, but it's also horrifying to understand it's in response to some extremely egregious bans that have really created devastation in parts of our country, like my home state of Texas, and possibly in Ohio if this doesn't go the right way.